I started playing jazz after I left college. All through college, I played classical music and funk music. And once I got out of college, I met a guy named Robert Boise Lowry, who taught jazz. He also taught Clifford Brown, who the Clifford Brown Festival is named after. Well, I think jazz is making a little comeback. It's not much, but it's making a comeback because there are some clubs opening up here in Wilmington, like the Nomad downtown, and there's more places for jazz musicians to play these past few months or so. I try to play the music at all venues that I play at, and some of the younger folks now are beginning to like it. They're saying it's different from what they've been used to hearing, but when I go and play it, they say, well, they never really listened to it before, but they like it now because the way that they heard us play it and they heard it live. So getting the music out to people, really plays an important part.
Essentially, I got to be on the bottom floor of the start of this project. I didn't expect it, but I was very, very happy to be part of it, and it's been a very fulfilling and interesting project for my PhD thesis. DSU's involvement is to serve in a capacity as an expert on the LIBS technique, which is the technique that the ChemCam instrument uses. So we will be participating in analyzing the LIBS data as it comes back from Mars and giving our technical expertise in that area. There's a large expectation that the ChemCam instrument is going to bring back more data at a higher rate than ever before. It's something like 10 ChemCam measurements a day. That's unprecedented. And the measurements can take as short as 6 minutes to do a full sequence of RMI imaging, ChemCam shots, and then RMI imaging afterwards. So we expect to get a lot of use out of this instrument. And you have to remember that this instrument's also serving as a sort of reconnaissance for all the other instruments because it has a standoff capability. So we expect a whole lot of data. I mean, the ChemCam team is going to be extremely busy. You're putting a puzzle together, you're putting a mystery together. So here we get to take all the data we want. On Mars we only have so much. So you use the puzzle pieces that you have here that you don't have on Mars to build the puzzle back together on Mars. All of the equipment is flight tested. So it goes through very vigorous shake tests and sound tests, mainly to make sure that it can sustain the launch. I think it's a very violent event. I'm not sure exactly how it grades next to the landing because they're using a landing technique that's never been used before. So in particular, they're using something called the sky crane to land the rover on its rocker bogie suspension system. So the rover itself is part of the landing gear, which is not part of previous rovers. Of course, this rover's about 3 times the size of the previous 2 rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. So that's nerve-wracking. Of course, we want to know that when our instrument does get to Mars, that it's working, so that those first few tests will be nail-biting. The rover operates independently. Commands are sent in the morning, and the rover operates autonomously throughout the course of the day. So you want to know that all the commands that you sequenced are right, and that there's not anything unexpected that happens.
3, 2, 1. Main engine start. 0.
It felt really great that there were so many people that I could tell were having the same mutual feeling. There were over 1,000 people at the stadium where we were watching the launch. It was a moment where I felt very proud. And very proud to be in a country where we could have this kind of collaboration across many nations for this one goal. I think it's a big world out there, and only in the third year of my graduate studies here, so I certainly would be interested in doing more NASA projects, but I haven't closed the door on other things either. Well, it's the sesquicentennial, so it's the 150th anniversary of the Civil War since it began, and so there's a lot of, talk about it right now. And one day I was working in one of the storage rooms, and I saw this box sitting on top of a cabinet, and I took a look at it and was really intrigued by what I saw. All these colorful envelopes with patriotic themes. Some had kind of interesting political cartoons on them, so I took a closer look and realized that there really is a story here, even though there's no writing on them. I know they came to the Historical Society in probably the 1860s or 1870s. They knew that, obviously the Civil War had was in the recent past. It was a huge event, of course, even here in Delaware, and so somebody, I don't know if it was from one person or, just kind of, once they found one, they stuck it in the collection, in the box, but somehow we have a box of about 250 or so of these envelopes.
And on the Union side, they were sold by the sutlers in every regiment. The soldiers had to buy their own stamps and their own envelopes and the stationery, and the most convenient source was the regimental sutler.
Printers picked up on the fact that soldiers had a lot of free time in camp, and this was pre-email and telephone, so the only way to communicate with friends and loved ones at home was by writing a letter.
I think they were purchased because the soldiers were already, especially in the early part of the war, very much enthused about saving the Union and preserving the Union, and this sort of represented their sentiment. It's a common sentiment of most Northerners. They did not want the South to leave.
History's not always pretty, and that's evident. A lot of them depicted Jefferson Davis, the former president of the Confederacy, being hung for his treasonous crime of seceding from the Union. So you realized how deep the feelings were.
Northerners viewed Davis and most of the high command of the South as traitors to the United States. And that's one reason why you see so much vilification, and even in the envelope collection down at the Historical Society.
In mainstream political cartoons today, you don't see a lot of cartoons sort of basking in the imagery of your political opponents being hanged, at least within American politics. I think it might be easier to find cartoons with, say, Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein with big targets on them. So, still sort of cheerleading for death. I think it's still a theme in contemporary political cartoons. It's obviously meant to demean, to denigrate Jefferson Davis in a pretty blunt way.
These envelopes and covers were not designed to shape a historical view or to have a propaganda value. They were the way people were, the way they felt.
It's like a bumper sticker for today. You don't have a lot of space to get a message across. And so very blunt, almost crude slogans and imagery, given the space and the technology they were working with, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, obviously, that's not illustrative of all of the debate going on. And this is the same time where you have Lincoln-Douglas debates, where Lincoln and Douglas stand up and talk for a couple hours, and people actually sit there and listen to them. So you kind of have the high end of political debate, and I think a lot of us remember that, it's talked about in school. I think one thing about these envelopes that it's nice to point out is we had the low end of political debate back then too.
Everybody thought the war would be resolved quickly, and so there were a lot of these items printed, and they do survive, and a lot of times intact because there was like a collecting mania that would go on, so sometimes people would collect the envelopes and not even use them.
So that's why you see so many of these envelopes when you go into collections in libraries and museums of Civil War documents, because they were commonly saved by the people who received them right along with the letter. So you open up a stack of letters and each one will be followed by its own envelope.
In some cases, the artwork on the envelopes took up the whole wrapper, so you couldn't even send it in the mail.
We're now, of course, in the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, and everything connected with the Civil War now has more popular demand than it had even 5 years ago. That would include these covers and envelopes. The ones that I have were a gift, 15 years ago, and at that time you could pick them up for a very reasonable price. That's really not true today. We're looking at individual unmailed envelopes somewhere around $300 is an average price.
They were collector's items, you know, when they were first printed, and now they are again.